In a galaxy far beyond the reach of Earth's maps, where stars burned like embers in an endless void, there stood a colossal structure known as the Cosmic Arena. It was a place of legend, carved from black stone that seemed to drink in light itself. Warriors from across the universe gathered here, not by choice, but by force, to fight for glory under the watchful gaze of the alien queen, Xylira. Her presence loomed over everything, her golden eyes glowing faintly beneath her crystalline crown. To defy her was unthinkable. To impress her, nearly impossible. Cal Valen wasn't supposed to be here. He was just a scavenger once, scraping together scraps on the fringes of human colonies scattered across space. But when Zorathian slavers raided his home, he became another prisoner tossed into their vast empire. After months of grueling labor, Cal's life changed when he was forced into the arena during a minor uprising. With nothing but a broken pipe and sheer desperation, he took down 3 guards who had cornered him. Word spread quickly about the human fighter with strange tactics and unrelenting determination. Soon enough, Cal found himself dragged into the brutal world of gladiatorial combat. The arena was unlike anything Cal had ever seen. Its walls stretched high into the sky, shimmering faintly with energy shields that trapped both fighters and spectators inside. Crowds filled the stands, alien species of every shape and size, chattering in languages Cal couldn't understand. Some cheered wildly, while others watched silently, their expressions unreadable. Above it all sat Xylira, her throne hovering above the battlefield like a dark moon. She rarely spoke, yet her decisions dictated the fates of everyone below. Today, however, felt different. As Cal stepped onto the sand-covered floor, his heart pounded harder than usual. The air crackled with anticipation. Rumors had been swirling among the other fighters. Xylira herself had taken an interest in this match. Cal didn't know what that meant, whether it was good or bad, but he knew one thing for certain. If he lost today, he wouldn't leave the arena alive. His opponent emerged from the opposite gate, a towering insectoid creature with jagged limbs and a carapace that gleamed like polished steel. The crowd erupted into cheers, chanting its name. Vraxk. Cal tightened his grip on his weapon, a short blade salvaged from a previous victory. He was no stranger to fear, but facing something so much larger and stronger made his stomach churn. Still, he reminded himself of why he fought, not just to survive, but to prove that even someone like him could rise above despair. As the horn sounded, signaling the start of the battle, Cal moved quickly, dodging Vraxk's initial charge. The insectoid swung its massive claws, leaving deep gouges in the ground where Cal had been standing moments before. Cal circled cautiously, searching for any weakness in his opponent's defenses. His mind raced, analyzing every detail, the way Vraxk shifted its weight, the blind spots behind its segmented body. This wasn't just brute strength versus skill. It was strategy against instinct. Xylira leaned forward slightly in her throne, her glowing eyes fixed on the human. There was something about him, how he adapted, how he refused to give up even when faced with overwhelming odds. For the first time in centuries, she felt curious. When Cal finally struck, driving his blade into a joint between Vraxk's armor plates, the crowd fell silent. Blood spilled onto the sands, and the insectoid collapsed with a deafening roar. Breathing heavily, Cal stood over his fallen foe, knowing this win would change everything, for better or worse. From above, Xylira smiled faintly. "Bring me more," she commanded softly. "Let us see how far this human can go." And so, Cal's journey began, not just as a fighter, but as a symbol of hope in a galaxy drowning in darkness. The crowd roared like a living storm as Cal Valen stood in the center of the arena, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. His victory over Vraxk had earned him a brief moment of respite, but now came the real test. Xylira's voice echoed through the arena, calm yet commanding. "Bracker the Unyielding," she announced. Her words met with deafening cheers from the spectators. From the opposite gate emerged a figure that made Cal's blood run cold. Bracker was a mountain of muscle and rage, standing at least 12 feet tall. His skin was charcoal black, cracked like cooled lava, and steam rose from his body, as though he carried the heat of his volcanic homeworld within him. In his massive hands, he gripped a hammer forged from molten metal, its head glowing red-hot. Every step he took shook the ground beneath Cal's feet. Cal tightened his grip on his blade, trying to steady his nerves. He knew brute strength wouldn't work against someone like Bracker. The alien champion was built for destruction, his every movement radiating raw power. But Cal had something Bracker didn't: wit and adaptability. As the horn blared, signaling the start of the fight, Cal darted sideways, avoiding Bracker's first thunderous swing. The hammer smashed into the sand where Cal had been standing moments before, sending shards of rock flying. Bracker roared in frustration, charging forward like a rampaging beast. Cal rolled to the side again, narrowly avoiding being crushed. Each strike left craters in the ground, forcing Cal to stay constantly on the move. He couldn't afford to let Bracker corner him. One hit from that hammer would end the fight instantly. But dodging alone wouldn't win this battle. Cal needed a plan, and fast. As he circled Bracker, Cal noticed something important. With every swing of his hammer, Bracker created cracks in the hardened surface of the arena floor. The repeated impacts were weakening the ground beneath them. An idea sparked in Cal's mind. If he could lure Bracker into hitting the same spot repeatedly, maybe he could turn the arena itself into a weapon. Cal began taunting Bracker, shouting insults that he hoped the alien could understand, or at least feel. "You're slow. Is that all you've got?" It worked. Bracker's rage boiled over, and he swung his hammer wildly, smashing it down again and again. Cal danced around him, careful to avoid the deadly blows while guiding Bracker toward a specific section of the floor. The cracks grew wider, deeper, until the ground started to tremble under their weight. Finally, Cal saw his chance. As Bracker raised his hammer high for another devastating blow, Cal sprinted toward the weakened area and leaped onto one of the largest fissures. The added pressure caused the ground to collapse beneath Bracker's immense weight. The champion stumbled, his legs sinking into the crumbling earth. Before he could recover, Cal launched himself off a nearby boulder, driving his blade downward with all his strength. The weapon pierced through a gap in Bracker's armor, embedding deep into his shoulder. Bracker let out a guttural scream, dropping his hammer as he fell to his knees. Steam hissed from the wound, mixing with the dust rising from the shattered ground. The crowd fell silent, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Cal stood panting, his blade slick with alien blood, staring down at the defeated giant. Celira watched from her throne, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, she leaned back in her seat, her golden eyes gleaming faintly. "Clever," she murmured, almost to herself. "Very clever." Her voice carried across the arena, addressing the crowd. "The human survives once more. Let us see if his ingenuity holds against my next champion." Cal exhaled sharply, realizing this was far from over. Bracker may have been defeated, but the alien queen's challenges were only beginning. Still, as he wiped sweat from his brow and glanced up at Celira's hovering throne, he allowed himself a small flicker of hope. If he could take down someone as formidable as Bracker, maybe, just maybe, he could survive whatever came next. For now, though, he lived to fight another day. And in the cosmic arena, survival was its own kind of victory. The arena was eerily quiet as Cal caught his breath, leaning on his blade. The crowd seemed unsettled, their cheers muted after witnessing Bracker's defeat. But Cal knew better than to relax. Celira's voice cut through the silence once again, smooth and deliberate. "Silithra," she called out, her tone carrying an almost sinister edge. From the shadows of the arena gates emerged a figure unlike anything Cal had ever seen. Silithra moved like liquid darkness, her lithe form draped in a cloak that shimmered faintly, blending seamlessly with the dim light around her. Her face was obscured by a mask resembling a spider's web, and her hands ended in long, whip-like tendrils tipped with gleaming barbs. She didn't roar or charge like Bracker. Instead, she slithered forward silently, her presence unnerving. Cale swallowed hard. This wasn't going to be a battle of strength. It would test something far more elusive, his ability to see danger before it struck. As the horn sounded, Silithra vanished into thin air, or so it seemed. One moment she was there, and the next, she dissolved into the shadows cast by the arena's towering walls. The lights above flickered slightly, plunging parts of the battlefield into near-total darkness. Cale spun around, his blade at the ready, but he couldn't find her. The only sound was the soft rustle of movement somewhere close by. Then, without warning, one of Silithra's barbed tendrils lashed out from the darkness, narrowly missing his throat. He stumbled back, adrenaline surging through him. Another tendril whipped past, grazing his arm and leaving a stinging welt. Whatever those barbs were coated with, they burned like fire. Panic threatened to take hold, but Cale forced himself to focus. He remembered stories about Nyxorian assassins like Silithra. They relied on stealth and speed, striking from the shadows where no one could see them. But sight wasn't everything. Closing his eyes, Cale listened intently, blocking out the murmurs of the crowd and focusing solely on the sounds around him. There, a faint scrape against the ground, followed by the whisper of fabric brushing against stone. With a sudden burst of movement, Cale lunged toward the source of the noise. His blade sliced through the air, catching one of Silithra's tendrils and severing it cleanly. The severed end writhed like a dying snake before dissolving into smoke. A low hiss escaped Silithra's mask, betraying her frustration for the first time. She stepped out of the shadows, revealing herself fully, her movements faster and less calculated now. Realizing her advantage was slipping away, Silithra attacked recklessly, launching multiple tendrils at once. Cale ducked and weaved, dodging most of them, but one grazed his leg, causing him to stumble. Pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. Using the distraction, he threw a handful of sand into the air, creating a cloud that momentarily blinded even Silithra's keen senses. In that split second, Cale closed the distance between them, driving his blade upward with precision. The tip of his weapon pierced through the base of her mask, forcing her to stagger backward. Her tendrils retracted instinctively as she clutched at her face, her balance faltering. With a final shove, Cale knocked her off her feet, pinning her to the ground. Breathing heavily, he pressed the edge of his blade against her throat, signaling victory. The crowd erupted into cheers, though many looked uneasy. This human fighter was proving harder to kill than anyone expected. Above, Silithra leaned forward slightly, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Adaptation," she whispered softly, watching Cale rise to his feet. "This one adapts." As medics dragged Silithra away, Cale wiped sweat from his brow, feeling the burning sting of the wounds on his arm and leg. Survival was becoming costlier with each fight, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a spark of defiance growing stronger. If he could survive this, he could survive anything, even the alien queen's deadliest champions. But as Silithra raised her hand to signal the next match, Cale knew the worst was yet to come. The arena fell silent as Cale stood in the center, his body aching from the wounds inflicted by Silithra. His breathing was heavy, and sweat dripped down his face, but he forced himself to stay focused. He knew better than to let exhaustion cloud his mind. Not when another opponent awaited him. Silithra's voice rang out once more, colder this time, almost taunting. "Teryx," she announced, her tone sending an uneasy ripple through the crowd. From the shadows emerged a figure unlike any Cale had faced before. Teryx was tall and slender, with pale blue skin that seemed translucent under the dim light. His eyes glowed faintly, pulsing like twin stars. Unlike Bracker's brute strength or Silithra's stealth, Teryx carried no visible weapon, only a staff topped with a glowing crystal orb. Yet there was something deeply unsettling about him, as if danger radiated from his very presence. Kale tightened his grip on his blade, ready for anything, or so he thought. As the horn sounded, Teryx raised his staff, pointing it directly at Kale. A sudden wave of dizziness hit him, and the world around him began to blur. Before Kale could react, his surroundings shifted entirely. Gone was the arena. Instead, he found himself standing in the ruins of his childhood home, the place where Zorathian slavers had first torn his life apart. Memories flooded back, vivid and painful. He saw his younger sister crying, clutching a tattered doll as raiders stormed into their shelter. He heard his father shouting desperately, trying to protect them. And then came the worst part, the moment they were captured, dragged away screaming while flames consumed what little remained of their lives. Kale fell to his knees, overwhelmed by grief and guilt. Why hadn't he been stronger? Why hadn't he saved them? "Get up," he shouted to himself, shaking his head violently. But the visions didn't stop. They'd morphed into darker scenes, comrades dying during escape attempts, friends lost in battles he couldn't win. Every failure, every regret, played out before his eyes, tearing at his resolve. Teryx watched silently, his glowing staff humming softly as he manipulated Kale's mind. But amidst the chaos, Kale realized something crucial. None of this was real. These weren't memories. They were constructs designed to break him. Summoning every ounce of willpower, he closed his eyes and focused on the present. He reminded himself of the truth. He was still in the arena, fighting for his life. Slowly, the illusions began to fade. The burning ruins disappeared, replaced by the cold stone floor beneath him. The cries of his family softened until all that remained was silence. Opening his eyes, Kale saw Teryx standing only a few feet away, his expression one of mild surprise. Clearly, he hadn't expected Kale to resist. But now clarity returned to Kale's mind. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, swinging his blade in a wide arc. Teryx tried to raise his staff again, but Kale was faster. With a single strike, he shattered the glowing orb atop the staff, severing its connection to Teryx's powers. The alien stumbled back, his glowing eyes dimming as his control over Kale's mind collapsed completely. Seizing the opportunity, Kale delivered a decisive blow, knocking Teryx to the ground. The crowd erupted into stunned cheers, many unable to believe what they had just witnessed. From above, Silira leaned forward slightly, her golden eyes narrowing. "Willpower," she murmured, her voice tinged with admiration. A rare quality indeed. As medics carried Teryx away, Kale steadied himself, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Beads of sweat mixed with blood trickled down his arms, but he refused to falter. Each victory brought him closer to freedom, and deeper into Silira's mysterious plans. Whatever came next, he vowed to keep fighting, not just for survival, but for hope itself. Kale stood in the center of the arena, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. Each victory had pushed him closer to the edge of his limits, and yet he endured. But as Silira's voice echoed once more through the stadium, a chill ran down his spine. "Daxthar," she declared, her tone calm but commanding. From the shadows emerged not one figure, but dozens, small, insectoid drones swarming into the arena like a living tide. They moved in perfect synchronization, their metallic bodies glinting under the dim light. At their center hovered a larger drone, its carapace adorned with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with energy. This was Daxthar, the swarm leader, a collective consciousness housed within the swarm itself. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, sensing this would be unlike any battle they'd seen before. Kale tightened his grip on his blade, his mind racing. He couldn't fight all of them head-on. Sheer numbers would overwhelm him in moments. As the horn sounded, signaling the start of the match, the swarm surged forward, surrounding him from every direction. Kale dove to the side just as several drones lunged at him, their razor-sharp appendages slicing through the air where he had been standing. Rolling to his feet, he slashed at the nearest drone, cutting it clean in half. But for every one he destroyed, two more took its place. The swarm pressed in relentlessly, forcing him toward the center of the arena. Realizing brute force wouldn't work, Kale scanned the battlefield for anything he could use to his advantage. His eyes landed on piles of debris scattered across the sand, remnants of earlier battles. An idea sparked in his mind. If he could create barriers and choke points, maybe he could funnel the swarm into smaller groups, making them easier to handle. With quick movements, Kale began dragging chunks of broken stone and metal into position, forming makeshift barricades. The swarm hesitated momentarily, confused by his actions. Using the brief reprieve, Kale lured them into narrow gaps between the debris, picking off individual drones as they squeezed through. Sparks flew as his blade clashed against their armored bodies, each strike weakening the swarm further. But the swarm adapted quickly, splitting into multiple groups to flank him. Kale found himself retreating toward the center again, his back against the largest pile of rubble. Sweat dripped down his face as exhaustion threatened to overtake him. Then he remembered something crucial. Daxthar wasn't just the drones. It was the central hive mind unit controlling them all. Focusing his efforts, Kale targeted the glowing patterns on the larger drone hovering nearby. Dodging attacks from the smaller ones, he fought his way closer to Daxthar, ignoring the stinging cuts inflicted by the swarm. With a final burst of strength, he leaped onto a boulder and launched himself at the leader, driving his blade deep into its pulsating core. The effect was instantaneous. The swarm froze mid-motion, their lights flickering out as Daxthar collapsed to the ground, lifeless. One by one, the remaining drones fell silent, their bodies scattering across the arena floor like discarded shells. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause, their cheers echoing through the arena. Above, Tylira rose slowly from her throne, clapping softly. Her golden eyes gleamed with intrigue. "You have exceeded expectations, human," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the noise. "Now let us see how far you can go." Kale sank to his knees, his chest heaving as adrenaline gave way to fatigue. Every muscle screamed in protest, but he allowed himself a small smile. He had survived another round. But the alien queen's tests were far from over. The arena fell silent, an eerie calm settling over the crowd. Kale knelt on the sand, his body trembling from exhaustion. His blade lay at his side, its edge nicked and dull after 4 grueling battles. He had faced beasts of brute strength, masters of stealth, manipulators of the mind, and a relentless swarm, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. From her hovering throne above the arena, Tylira rose gracefully to her feet. Her golden eyes locked onto Kale's weary form as she descended slowly, her crystalline crown shimmering with an otherworldly glow. The crowd gasped in unison, their whispers filling the air. No one had ever seen the alien queen step into the arena personally, until now. Kale stared up at her, disbelief warring with fear. This wasn't part of the deal, he muttered under his breath, struggling to stand. But Tylira only smiled faintly, her expression unreadable. "You misunderstand, human," she said, her voice resonating like a soft melody. "My champions were distractions. The true test was always meant to be against me." Before Kale could respond, 2 energy blades materialized in Tylira's hands, their edges crackling with lethal power. She moved with fluid grace, each step deliberate yet unhurried. Kale tightened his grip on his own weapon, knowing it was no match for her advanced technology. Still, he refused to back down. If this was how it ended, so be it, but he would go down fighting. The horn sounded, and Tylira lunged forward with breathtaking speed. Kale barely managed to parry her first strike, the force of her blow sending shockwaves through his arms. She attacked relentlessly, her movements precise and calculated, leaving no room for error. Every swing of her blades forced Cal to retreat further, his footing faltering as he struggled to keep up. Despite the overwhelming odds, Cal remembered every lesson he'd learned in the arena. He used debris scattered across the battlefield to block or redirect her strikes, buying himself precious seconds. When she aimed low, he jumped. When she feinted left, he countered right. Though outmatched in skill and weaponry, his adaptability kept him alive, if only barely. Celira seemed amused by his efforts, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "You are resilient," she remarked, almost conversationally, as she pressed her attack. "But resilience alone will not save you." As the fight dragged on, Cal grew weaker, his movements slower. A misstep cost him dearly. One of Celira's blades grazed his shoulder, slicing through fabric and flesh. Pain seared through him. But he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. Summoning all his remaining strength, he launched a desperate counterattack, aiming for her exposed side. To his astonishment, Celira didn't dodge. Instead, she allowed his blade to graze her arm, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. For the first time, there was a flicker of respect in her gaze. "Enough," she declared, stepping back and dismissing her energy blades with a wave of her hand. The crowd held its breath, unsure of what would happen next. Celira approached Cal, who stood panting, his weapon hanging limply at his side. She reached out, touching his wounded shoulder gently. A warm light enveloped the injury, healing it instantly. Cal blinked in confusion, pain replaced by relief. "You have earned my respect, Cal Valen," Celira said softly, her tone carrying both authority and admiration. "Few have ever stood toe-to-toe with me. Fewer still have shown such ingenuity and courage." For a moment, Cal thought she might offer him freedom, or perhaps demand his life. Instead, she gave him a choice: remain as her champion forever, revered across the galaxy, or leave the arena and take responsibility for inspiring rebellion among the oppressed races under Zorethian rule. Cal hesitated, then straightened his posture, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I choose freedom," he said firmly, "and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure others get theirs too." Celira nodded, almost approvingly. "Then go, human. But know this: your actions here today will change more than just your fate." With that, the gates opened, and Cal walked out of the arena, not as a slave or a gladiator, but as a symbol of hope. Cal stepped out of the arena for the last time, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. The gates closed behind him with a heavy thud, sealing away the horrors and victories he had faced inside. For the first time in years, he felt truly free. But freedom came with responsibility. As Cal walked through the bustling streets of Celira's capital city, he realized that his fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Word of his triumphs spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Stories of the human who defeated the alien queen's strongest champions inspired hope among the oppressed races under Zorethian rule. Slaves whispered tales of Cal's ingenuity and resilience. Rebels painted murals of his battles on crumbling walls. To them, he wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was a symbol of defiance against tyranny. Cal didn't waste any time. He traveled from world to world, meeting with resistance leaders and rallying those who dared to dream of liberation. His journey took him to planets ravaged by war, where skies were choked with ash and rivers ran black with pollution. It brought him face to face with suffering he could barely comprehend, but also courage he couldn't ignore. Everywhere he went, people joined his cause, swelling the ranks of what would soon become known as the Coalition of Free Worlds. Meanwhile, back in the heart of the Zorethian Empire, Celira watched these developments closely. At first, her advisors urged her to crush the growing rebellion before it gained momentum. But instead of ordering fleets to annihilate rebel strongholds, Celira did something unexpected. She began dismantling the oppressive systems that had defined her reign for centuries. Trade routes once reserved for elite species were open to all. Forced labor camps were shut down, their prisoners released, And perhaps most shockingly, she called for an end to gladiatorial combat in the cosmic arena. Many questioned her decisions, accusing her of weakness or even betrayal. But Silira remained steadfast. Change is inevitable, she told her court one day, her golden eyes gleaming with resolve. The human showed me that strength lies not in domination, but in unity. Years passed, and Kale became more than just a leader. He became a legend. Under his guidance, the coalition liberated dozens of planets, toppling tyrants and freeing millions from bondage. Yet despite his victories, Kale never sought power for himself. Instead, he worked tirelessly to ensure that no one would ever suffer under oppression again. One evening, after a long day of strategizing with coalition leaders, Kale found himself standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast ocean. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Behind him, the hum of starships preparing for another mission filled the air. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace. As he gazed at the stars twinkling above, Kale thought about how far he'd come. From a scavenger scraping together scraps to a warrior who inspired change across the galaxy. He knew the fight for freedom would never truly end, but for the first time in his life, he felt hopeful. Somewhere out there, among the countless worlds spinning through the void, a new dawn was breaking, a future where everyone, regardless of race or origin, could live without fear. And Cal Valen, he was ready to see it through until the very end.